Hello again, everybody, and thanks for joining us today for our Teams in Motion episode. My name is Katie, and I'll be your host today for this episode. I'm one of our customer success managers here at Asana, and I'm more than delighted to speak with George Brooks from Crema on client management today. Before we go ahead and get started, I want to review what we're going to discuss today. We're going to start with some brief introductions, and then we're going to talk about the background of Crema and their experience with Asana. Then we'll dive into some of the structure and organization that Crema has found to be effective for working with clients in Asana. And finally, he'll walk us through the process of how they get a new client on board. And then at the end, we'll have plenty of time for questions and answers. So thank you again so much, everybody, for joining us. We're going to get it kicked off with a brief introduction of my great friend, George Brooks. George is the founder and chief product officer at Crema. He leads his cross-discipline team of strategists, managers, designers, and developers in finding the best methods, techniques, tools, and technology to help entrepreneurs and brands launch new products and business lines. George has worked as a UX UI designer for over 10 years, and he's passionate about building creative teams to solve big problems. So with that, I'm going to kick it over to George. Thanks so much for joining us today, George.
Thank you, guys. This is really exciting, really fun.
Our pleasure. So to start, can you just provide us with a brief overview of the work of Crema and the work that your team does on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, absolutely. So Crema's background first started off as a lot of agencies do, right? We started doing websites and digital work. Primarily, we love digital. We stayed in the digital space, and it was a design-first agency. So my background was in design, and we launched as a design agency about 8 years ago. Since then, we kind of just iterated and continued to refine who we were. And in that process, we really fell in love with entrepreneurship and launching new product lines. So as we did that, we started to build a team, or multiple teams now, around primarily figuring out how to not only bring a new product to life through UX, UI, design, development, platforms, architecture, and so on and so forth, but also trying to figure out how to achieve product market fit through customer adoption, growth hacking, a little bit of market research, usability testing, and trying to build products that people actually want to use, not just build products for the sake of having more products in the world. So built a cross-discipline team that is really much better at that than I am now, and it's really fun to have really smart and creative people around me, so it's a lot of fun.
Cross-discipline indeed. I say you do a little bit of everything, it seems like. And I'd love to dive a little bit more detail about the team and the work that the team does and how you built out the processes you use today. I understand that you're kind of a process guru and you've refined those processes over the years. So we'd love to get a little bit of background of what that process looked like.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've got to give props to one of my guys here, Michael Luchin, who's my project coordinator, project manager. He is even more of an Asana nerd than I am, which I love about it. And so we collaborate a lot on this. But over the years, we really kind of went through a number of different tools and processes. And one of the biggest things we found as an agency, or as a person that's doing client work, not just doing an internal product for ourselves, was trying to figure out how we best not only find collaboration internally, though I do mostly hire internal staff and we all work in our own office, so we don't have a lot of remote workers. We do still find that having a technology platform was crucial for us to be able to share what we're working on and share progress and just to keep synced in what we called shared understanding of where the project was. On top of that, though, really, we've found that our clients were often feeling as if they were blind. They didn't really know what was going on. And if anybody has owned a digital agency before, we know that trust is a huge issue with your clients. And so in order to build that trust, it was all about making sure that they were informed about what's going on. So we definitely went through a number of different tools. We've tried the Basecamps of the world, the Trellos of the world, Jira and Pivotal Tracker and everything else. And what we kept falling into was most of those other tools forced you into their process. And our process just always was a little bit different than that. And so we started using it internally, expanded on what we wanted to do with it. And if I could share the iterations we went through, this would be much longer than a 30-minute conversation. But we've iterated a lot with Asana as you guys have released new product features, we've been able to bring those into the fold of how we better serve our clients and collaborate internally.
Great. Yeah, I know it's quite the process over the years, and that's definitely helpful background as we head into that. So once you made that decision to work with your clients in Asana, would you mind walking us through what the goals look like in making that decision?
Yeah, I think the big thing for us is we're a pretty transparent company. I mean, all the way to the way that we work internally to how we work with our clients. We don't tend to sugarcoat anything. It's very much, hey, here's where the project actually is. Here's what the roadblocks are that we're running into. Here's where we think we're going to find success and what features we're focused on now. And in the process of doing that, we do have, daily stand-ups, and we have our normal check-ins with our clients on a weekly basis or even sometimes daily basis. But we still needed a place for them to kind of see what was the roadmap going forward. So the big piece for us was that we wanted to find a tool, and this slide says it perfectly. We wanted to find a tool that internally gave us focus, allowed us to know where is accountability set in our team internally, and then also where can we just collaborate on ideas? Where can we throw out things that we want to consider on each project or consider internally, or even consider that the client might have an idea in the middle of the week before a status call and they want to throw something our way. Right. Where's a good place for them to put that? And so that really gave us, again, a place to focus so we could assign tasks to each other and give accountability, a place to collaborate that allowed us to really be always sharing our vision for how we're moving forward and what the current problems were that we were solving and the solutions we were suggesting to solve those. And then transparency. I think transparency is way undervalued in our industry as a whole. I think there's this feeling of we always have to prove that we're doing something else, kind of hidden behind the scenes. And the reality is, again, it always left a client feeling a little blind as to what they were investing their money into. And so we always wanted to let the client see, hey, here's actually what we're doing. Here's where we're focused. Look at the conversation. Dive as deep as you want, but we'll give you some areas for focus, but dive as deep as you want if you want to go see really what the team's doing right now.
Absolutely. And I love how that kind of transformed out of the culture of the company into the tools and the processes that you were using on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, it's a huge part for us. I mean, even Dan and I, my business partner and I, the way that we run our company, we're a pretty flat company, so we're very transparent with everything down to the financials of how we're doing as a company. And so I think that that's a big part of, we think we're better because of the team we put around us, and we think we're better because of the opportunity that we have to collaborate with our clients. You're only going to build better products together, not in isolation.
I love that. That's fantastic. Great. And now, building off of that philosophy and kind of the decision process behind that, we'd love to dive into some of the nuts and bolts of how you work with clients in Asana. So can you walk us through the team and project workflows that you've refined over the years?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the big things for us is we kind of went through a couple different iterations of how we wanted to set up our team structures, especially when teams were introduced into Asana, and how we wanted to use that as a place where we could give focus to our internal teams. We've grown a lot over the last year, and so we now have multiple teams that are really focused on multiple clients. In the early days, of course, you just kind of wing it with the small team that you have and pull together the piece, shout across the room sometimes. But as the team grew, we knew we needed to create focus. So the way that we use teams, I think internal teams, people that might use Asana for an internal product organization sometimes use teams in the sense of the trade, whether it's the marketing department or the product or department or the dev. We use teams around our clients. So we'll set up a different team for each client. So you can see, even on the example on the screen, there's the T3 presenter is a client that we have. Then all of our team internally that's focused on that project gets invited, as well as the client gets invited to the team as a whole. So they do get complete access to see the entire space and conversations that we're having. And then what that allows us to do is really set up some focused areas for the client to have access to. So a couple other things just to touch on there. When we set up a team, we use what we call client codes or team codes, which basically was a better way for the search that Asana has to show up for us. So you'll see here we've even used T3 was the client code for this particular client. Usually we just use a truncated version. 1 million cups is up above. We used 1MC as the client code for them. What's nice about that is that we use the same project names on all of our teams. And so when you have a client code, you can easily search, 1MC client comms, and it pulls back pretty quickly. So that's been really helpful for us. That was a little bit of a hack that we used, and Asana was pretty flexible enough to allow us to do that. So that was fun. I think that the staff, only the staff that needs to be focused on this team gets invited, so that the rest of the company isn't annoyed or bothered by the notifications of a project that maybe they're not on. And that's where the teams really gave us some good focus. And again, biggest thing is get the client in there, and we do spend a lot of time bringing the client into speed, and I think we'll get into that in a second when we start talking about client comms. But we bring that client up to speed. We do a short little training with them to make sure they're familiar with how we use Asana, what they need to be focused on, so that we can best collaborate with them in this space.
Awesome, fantastic. And so you mentioned kind of you use these team codes and have the same project names for each of the client teams. Would you mind diving into some of those projects that you use?
Yeah, absolutely. So some of the base projects that we use that we've set up are, if I go down to kind of the core list here, client comms. Client comms is the first in our list. It's at the top of the list so that our client doesn't feel like they have to go searching for what is relevant to them. The cool thing about client comms is that you can have tasks in any other projects, and I love Asana's ability to cross-reference a task to multiple projects. So what we might have is we might have something, and I'll get down to this in a second, but we might have something in priorities or in the task board or even something on ICE, and we go, you know what, we need to bring that conversation back up to the client. Let's cross-reference that back out to client comms. Make sure, of course, that they're tagged or that they're assigned to that task. But just make sure that client comms is the place that they know they can go to see anything that we want to bring to their attention. Also is a place where it allows them to drop comments or to drop tasks that they're thinking about throughout the week. So you'll see here, your needs or questions. So that's for them to drop anything below that header that says, hey, this came up today in an internal meeting we were having. I wanted to bring it up in our next conversation. Great, we can start a conversation right there. Project, and then down below the header, production team requests. That's more of things that we've assigned back out to them, and they know this is the place that they can come in, skim through the tasks that are relevant to them. Anything else, there's probably 1,000 tasks underneath this that they don't need to be worried about. These are the things that are relevant for them. So client comms is step one. Step two is timeline. Timeline for us is really just effectively a roadmap. We want to get just kind of a bird's eye view of the plan for where we're going forward. We work on a duration style contract, so we're trying to get a little bit away from committing to deliverables, especially when you're building new product lines. You're going to pivot a lot, and things are going to change, and you're going to get feedback from the client, and so on and so forth. And so we work on duration-based contracts, which allow us to say, hey, here's the roadmap that we see ahead of us in this timeline, but we're going to break that down on a sprint-by-sprint basis or on an ongoing priorities basis, which we'll get to in a second. But this gives a good snapshot so the client understands, here's where we believe we're going, here's the sequence of events we think that it'll take to get there, but this project does change quite a bit as we move forward, and the client's able to have access to see that change and collaborate with us on our weekly status meetings. Below that is priorities. Priorities is really where we manage the day-to-day tasks for our team. And I really should say it's really where we manage our week by week. We work in 1 week sprints. I think a lot of agile or lean shops work in 2 week sprints. We found that we could set accountability around what could be done in 1 week. So if I ask a developer, hey, this is what I want to get done this week, they can say, yeah, I can probably get that done by a week from now, and have a pretty good confidence level of whether or not that's true or not. 2 weeks, it gets a little fuzzy of whether or not we can actually predict what you're going to do in the next 80 hours. So in priorities, what we focus on is the headers of current, which is whatever is currently being worked on in this particular sprint. It's the agreed upon scope of items that we're going to be worked on. The client agreed on those things that we're going to be working on, and the team buys in on that too. So my developers, my designers, my strategists have all said, yes, I agree, we can achieve that this week, and that's what's in the current. Current shouldn't change during the week, so that locks in. That pretty much stays pretty solid for a full week. Up next and to finalize are where we start to organize. To finalize, I'm going to jump down below. To finalize is really where we throw any new idea that comes up at any point in time. So we throw a lot of tasks or stories or ideas in there, but then when we're ready to start planning them, or we think they might be the next thing we're going to work on next sprint, we start shifting them up into up next, start planning or estimating whether or not that time's going to be accurate. And then when we regroup as a team to plan the next sprint, we shift it up into current. So that really goes from to finalize, up next, and then up into current when we're actually working on those things. Later is a tag that's way down below. Later is something that we've really decided, you know what, let's table this. It's on ice. We'll work on it eventually, but let's just shove it to the bottom. We know this isn't high priority. And when you're doing any new product line or any new venture or startup, whatever that is, you have to really say no to a lot. So it's saying no to things and pushing them down into later. The last piece I'll add to that is task board. We actually use the task board a little less than we used to. So it used to be what we would do is underneath each of these stories inside of priorities, which says, here's what I want the product to do. If a person clicks here, they ought to experience this response or this feature. Underneath that, we would set accountability that each team member in their role or their responsibility would go make their own tasks. And then we would cross-reference those back out to a task board, and you could see how that would start to really get convoluted and very hard to track. So the way that we set accountability is that the whole team agrees to what's in priorities, and then they make their own task items as subtasks in each of those priorities. So they'll, off to the right, if you can see in that snapshot, there's inside that first task, there is a number of tasks that these guys did great. They actually checked them off. We got them done. They have their personal tasks that they are going to manage themselves to hit that outcome that week. We're a very outcomes-based company, so we believe that, again, we're going to ask them to say, yes, I'll hit that outcome. What it takes to get there is really up to them and their collaboration with their team and with the client. So I don't care, honestly, where they manage their personal day-to-day tasks, as long as I have some exposure to kind of seeing where it might be. So it's nice to see them in a subtask list here, or that they've shared to me that it's someplace else. So some of our developers will manage their day-to-day tasks in GitHub issues or in their own personal list, as long as I have access to kind of see those things. The thing that we are accountable to as a team is what's in priorities. So again, high level, timeline is the roadmap. Priorities is where we manage on a sprint by sprint basis and what we're actually working on and how we move forward. And then, oh, and these are great examples. I forgot we had these examples. Thanks. So this is a more drilled in view of timeline. So you can see we actually put dates to those. It looked at some of Asana's integrations with third-party services. We do sometimes use Instigant, which is a great third-party tool. It allows us to actually see the timeline or the roadmap on a Gantt chart. I personally don't love Gantt charts. I think they're not necessarily the most useful tool in the world, but clients do, for whatever reason, love that visualization. And so it is a nice little shareable tool. Putting those dates to that help you to kind of lock that out. So this is on the timeline. Again, this just changed a lot as we move forward, as we learn from our testing, and as we learn what is going to achieve product market fit with our clients. But timeline is about dates, seeing the future if that is at all possible. I think, right?
Yes.
I don't remember what our other example was. Yeah,
so
please stop me. Please stop me.
No, this is fantastic. So we'd love to walk from there about the process of bringing that new client on board. And again, we'll go back to some of those projects that you just mentioned, but we'd love to see kind of what that looks like and the process of then building that out into Asana.
Yeah, for us, when we bring a new client in, the first thing that we talk about doing, and a number of different companies call this something different, whether it's a discovery or a deep dive or whatever that is, we really focus on doing a strategy session with our clients. So for us, those tend to be anywhere between a 2 to 3 day, pretty intensive 3-day session where we're breaking down, understanding the business problem that our client is achieving to solve, who they're solving it for, and then how can we start building experiments around solving those. So we start off with a 3-day session. Out of that session, we end up writing a number of what we call user stories. And again, a user story is just to say, this particular user type ought to be able to do this particular thing and get this particular result. And so what we'll build is this, what's called a capabilities project. The capabilities project for us is an archive of features. It's an archive of functionality definitions. Again, this is where we just get a baseline for this is what we think we're going to build. These are all assumptions, and I think I even said that here. So we list our user types, and the rest of this is an assumption, especially when you're starting a new business. It's all assumptions, and you're going to spend the rest of your business life proving that those assumptions are true. Asana, I know you guys are still doing that. So you're just constantly proving assumptions and experimenting, right? So that's where we iterate a lot with our clients. But we do have to start with the baseline. So we'll say, hey, here's what we think the capabilities of what we can do within your budget, within the timeline that you've talked about, and within what we think to be true, and how do we go prove those things. So we built out assumptions, and then we do tag a management area. So that might be, we use tags for what are the platforms we're going to be using. So in this instance, there's an iOS client, there is a web client, and then sometimes there's an Android client, and then also maybe there's a business component. So there's a marketing department that we want to make sure that we cross-reference to, or there is a growth hacking or a data science side of things that we want to start looking into. And we'll tag those things that we make sure that we just take inventory of all the pieces that we don't want to forget about. Cool thing about that is that when you start using tags, if you click into those tags, then you can really get a good snapshot of what's all the iOS stuff that we wanted to do. Sweet. If I tap on that tag, I can see everything iOS related. What's all the web client stuff we want to do? Look at the tag view, and that gives us a really good response. Occasionally, we'll use tags as well to show a status. So if something's on hold or if it needs further review, we'll tag it that way and then put a color code to it, so that it just gives our attention that this is on hold, or this is in risk, or this is just something that grabs our attention and let us know, hey, pay attention to those items. They may be need a little more love than some of the other tasks that are in our priorities. Build out the team core projects and manage projects. So I think from there, what we'll do, and I want to talk about onboarding. So after the strategy session, we write out all those capabilities, user stories, write out the assumptions, and then we spend about a 30-minute period of time training the client on how we're going to use Asana. We invite them in. We actually walk them through the different projects that they need to be focused on. Kind of similar to this, we walk them through how we hope to integrate them into the process, where they need to focus and where they need to just probably ignore and not worry about it. And then my project manager, or the project managers on each project, will create a short video as an archive of that as well. So just a quick screen capture, walking the person through. It's usually in the project description, or we'll also put it in our first team conversation space, and then we'll reference that video so they can go back to it at any time. If they forget how to use Asana, they can click on the video and watch that. And it can be a little overwhelming the first time you come in and the first time you see it. Until you get into the daily kind of process, the video is a good reference material.
Great. And then we just have another example of that priorities project that you said, and I think we have a sample here of those tags that you use for things like box or things like that as well, which is great. So then this gets built out then after that capabilities project is kind of completed, is that right?
That's right, and that's where I bring in, so usually a project on the way our team structure is set up, a product strategist and a project manager are usually the first person working with the client. We're spending a lot of time unpacking the business and the why of what they're building. And then this is where we start to bring in the rest of the team, and we start doing story point estimations, and we start talking about how are we going to actually achieve moving through that product and getting it built. And you can see here, this is a really good example. Sorry for some of the redaction, but a good example of where high level, we've tried to use the title this is just a few like small tips. We try to use the title to be short and concise to the point of what the story is about. Sometimes we'll even make it just a pure title of, so this one writes, when I get started, I want to do something at a high level so that I can see something else. We might actually just describe that as to what it is and actually put that story down in the description. But again, one of the powers of Asana is that you can @reference things all over the place. So we use the @referencing down below to say previous stories with this capability. Okay, so @reference the other stories that might be related to this functionality that might need to be considered as we're building it out. And then you can see the tasks down below or the real actionable assigned to an employee and assigned to a team member about getting that done by a specific date.
Fantastic. So everybody has all the reference information there and can dive as deep as they need to.
And the client can see it, the team can see it, because honestly, the team gets blind too. I mean, when you get busy, you forget about what everybody else is working on.
Yeah. Isn't that the truth? Wonderful. Well, I'd love to move from here into how this kind of comes to life in real life, so how all the work that's built out in these projects and teams then is brought up during the review meetings and how you guys kind of review as a team what's going on with each of these individual clients.
Absolutely. So we used to meet every Monday for an 8.5-hour meeting every Monday.
Wow.
It was the worst idea we ever had as a company, I think. But I will say what it did teach us is that rhythm of meeting as a whole company or as a whole team allowed us to understand what was going on across all projects. What we also learned doing a little bit of research just from a psychology standpoint is Mondays are the worst days to have meetings. And so we pivoted that to setting up our sprints to work from Wednesday to Wednesday. So by Wednesday, you've actually had some time to kind of finish out the tasks from the previous week, and you're ready to kind of focus on what you're going to do next. So we meet every Wednesday. We first meet as an entire organization. We're about 20 people now. And so all teams will meet. We circle up, have a stand up, and everybody gets a real quick snapshot of just where are their projects. Is the client happy? How are things going? After that, then we break into team groups, and there is some crossover that certain team members will be in multiple groups. So the project managers do a great job of scheduling those out throughout the day so that each team has a couple hours to meet, sit down, review what they got done from the previous sprints, and then focus on what's next. And the way that we do that is we go to our priorities project, review those stories that are in current, and then say, hey, did we hit that? Were we accountable to each other that we actually hit that those stories this week? And if we didn't, why not? How are we going to go back to the client and tell them that we didn't get done what we said we were going to? Was there a roadblock? Was it, a delay in their review? There's a number of different things there, but it's just a very honest conversation about where things are. Then we take what's in the up next space and start moving that up into what are we going to do this week. If something stays in current over multiple sprints, we always make a comment as to why. Why is it still here? What was done? Did we make progress on that task or on that feature? And if so, where does it currently stand so that we just get a good status update and the client can see that. So again, we review and estimate priorities and upcoming tasks. And again, I run my company very outcomes driven. I don't expect my team to work, in their seat from 8 to 5 because I believe that people work differently depending on how they collaborate. But it's about, okay, now that we've planned for next week, we've estimated what we think that's going to take. Does everybody agree, again, that we're going to hit those outcomes for next week? And then they get their own kind of self-management style to task prioritize what they're going to do to get everything done by next week.
Great. Thanks so much, George. It's great to see everything kind of come full circle in the context of those meetings. So now we're going to move into some questions and answers. So if anybody has questions, please feel free to put those into the questions field now. Looks like the first question we have here is from Alexi. And George, he wants to know about, he's seen the numbers in square brackets at the beginning of tasks throughout a few of the projects that you have. So he's just wondering what those numbers signify and how you use those in the context of your project.
Yeah, that's iterated as well. So those will mean different things depending on the client or depending on the project. I will say we're starting to move into better measuring velocity. If you're familiar at all with the agile processes, you look at using story point estimations, which are built not around necessarily defining the hours that you think it's going to take to do the task, but more the level of effort that you think it's going to take to do the task. And then you look at that level of effort as in relationship to the other things that you need to get done that week. So each week we ought to have a total story point number that we think we can achieve that week. If you're interested in story points, there's a ton of YouTube videos and blogs to go check out. Just search for Agile story points. But that's kind of what these represent. Sometimes they'll have a split because might mean that there are two different distinctively different teams that are going to need to be working on different parts of that effort. And so we'll put two different numbers there, or maybe there's a split because one team member really believes it might be a little bit more difficult, so we'll just make note of that. In the past, we have used those as hour estimates as well. This project doesn't reflect the hour estimates, but sometimes you'll see that as a whole team, we think this is going to be X number of hours. That became really difficult, mostly because I'm not as concerned about the number of hours it's going to take. I'm more concerned about just the level of effort being achievable in the week. And so we've moved a little bit away from distinctively giving hours because, hey, if we're able to find a way to do it better or faster, I'd rather them do that. So those numbers represent story points for us right now, though we have definitely iterated on that. We've tried a number of different ways to do it. The cool thing about Asana, again, you can actually total that up if you select multiple tasks in a space. I think the brackets do math for you, which is great for me. Trust me.
The next question we have here is from Chad, and Chad wants to know, George, if you use any Asana hacks, and if you do, which hacks are your favorite?
We have in the past. I will say we turn them on, we'll try them, and then we'll turn them off. Sometimes there are some performance things that we've run into, especially as Asana is iterating on the product pretty rapidly. I mean, some of the fun ones were like the unicorn, right? When you check a task and stuff like that. I'm trying to remember if there's any other hacks that we use on a regular basis. I think a lot of the hacks that we used to use ended up being turned into kind of full-fledged features. And that's just because we've been using Asana for such a long period of time.
The add numbers and brackets, I think, used to be a hack.
Yes, and now it's kind of more native to it.
Right.
So we've turned a lot of those things on and off. I think the big thing is we more have fun just seeing what Asana's team comes up with and what they're playing with internally, because that's kind of what we do as well. So I think as a little bit of a fanboys, we like to live vicariously through their developers and see what they're playing with.
Awesome. So Francois wants to know if you use Asana dashboards or if you use the progress area projects.
We don't as much. Partly that's because I think that works really well if you explicitly base your progress on the number of tasks complete. When we used to use the task board a lot, we did. So what we would do is if you had a user story and underneath that user story you had a sublist or subtask list of all of the individual person's tasks. Again, this got convoluted, but if you can follow me, we would then cross-reference those subtask lists out to the task board. So at all points in time, you would have a pretty large task board of all the little tiny things that every single person was going to need to do. And then we would do it kind of Kanban style, where it would say, here's what's currently being worked on, here's what's on deck, and so on and so forth. It was nice to see those tasks be checked off and then judge a certain level of progress. The reason I think we stopped using the kind of completed or checked off task is showing progress for us. We tend to pass tasks around to each other quite a bit. So we'll reassign a task to somebody else if the responsibility to QA that task goes back to somebody else. So you didn't ever see it. Sometimes there wasn't that feeling of, well, we've made a lot of progress, but why aren't we seeing it in the amount of things that were checked off? So instead it was that task just got handed to somebody else, that it was now their responsibility to QA it. And then it got handed back to the client to review it. And it really wasn't until maybe weeks later that the final element got checked off. and it just wasn't as good a reflection of the progress. So we don't use dashboards as much. I might ask my project managers if they ever use it as personally, but I know in the projects I manage, I just don't use that dashboard space as much as maybe Asana would hope that I would.
That's quite all right. Yeah, that's definitely helpful. So we have another question from Greg, and he's joining us all the way from France, which is awesome. And he wants to know what your customer or your clients' reactions are when you tell them that you're going to be using Asana together, and how much time they take to be at 100% functional.
That's a great question.
Yeah.
So I will say the first pass is, oh, we're really excited that we're going to have a tool, and we really want to be integrated with our partner. So that's great. And then 2 weeks later, it's, oh man, Asana. It's kind of hard to keep up on all that, and it's a little overwhelming. And so it definitely is a period of time. I do think it's about, and I feel this way about any new product for any person. So if you're trying out a new email client, if you're trying out a new social network, you really do have to give it 2 weeks before you're comfortable with it, right? And so I think the same goes for our clients. We don't expect that they're going to be up to full steam in the first week or even in the second week. It's not usually until we get through a couple sprints and they can see the progress and the project managers are sitting there looking at it with them that they start to get integrated. I will say the first couple weeks is also when they get inundated with notifications in their inbox, their email inbox. And so they're learning how to manage a bunch of things being assigned to them or them being added to as followers to a bunch of things. And it takes about 2 weeks before that normalizes, before that becomes a daily routine to manage their inbox, and they start to get in a rhythm. Some clients will say, oh, I know I need to be doing better. And it is just a constant reminder. The thing that I will say, when we as a project management team on our end start to become lax or we start to give a little bit and not expect the client to participate with us there, and then we start letting them send us emails, everything falls apart. If we don't force our client in a loving and in careful way, if we don't really encourage our client to stick with us in Asana for the long haul, then what ends up happening is very broken communication of, oh, well, I didn't see that in an email, or that one was in an Asana task, but this is in an email. If you can force that your communication happens via email, absolutely wrong, via Asana, then you really do find that they'll sync up, and it does. It takes a couple of weeks, but they start syncing up, and they'll live there. And then they'll be surprised at how much less they're using email. Internally as Crema Lab, we only use Asana and we use Slack as our kind of instant messaging tool. And those are the two products that we almost exclusively use unless we're doing new business sales because we don't yet have the client in Asana. We don't send emails internally at all. We send Slacks or we assign tasks. And same thing with the client. Once the client's integrated, we really force them to stay in that Asana ecosystem.
Love that. Lovingly force them.
Of course,
Wonderful.
of course.
Of course. So we have another one from Francois about what other integrations you use other than Instagant. Do you use any other third-party tools that integrate with Asana?
Yeah, the biggest ones that we use, Instagant's probably the one that we use the most frequently. We sometimes use a Zapier hooks. I know that Michael, my project manager, has a number of different Zapier hooks set up for integrating tasks. We also use Do for recording some of our meetings. And so he'll occasionally use that as a cross-reference. So I think it's do.com. He likes to take his notes there. It's not necessarily integrated into the full process yet, but he'll take notes there, and then the Zapier hooks will assign tasks back in Asana. We're constantly trying out different ways to quickly add tasks from third-party tools. So I know it used to be Alfred. He used to use Alfred when that was kind of before Spotlight kind of cloned Alfred. But we had an Alfred kind of Jotsana type integration where anytime we would meet, and talk through something, and it'd be like, hey, do you mind checking into that? He would make a quick task and then throw it to his Asana. As far as anything else that kind of talks to something else, I think we find the Zapier hooks work a little bit better sometimes than people's native processes. I will say one of our internal kind of innovation lab projects for this year is that we're hoping to build a little bit of a dashboard using Asana's API to show off or to give a client a snapshot view of what's going on in their project. But that's TBD. We're still working on it. So.
Awesome. Great. So we have two more questions. The second to last is, do you have any concerns from employees about using Asana, and how do you make sure that they use it regularly? Are there any kind of challenges there, or is it pretty easy?
Absolutely. I mean, again, it can be an incredibly overwhelming environment because it's so open-ended. That's what I love about it, because then when our process changes, we don't have to be stuck in for example, Pivotal Tracker's process. We can let Asana move with our iterations of processing. I think more so the team is more, it's not as much about the tool sometimes as it is about how much we might be trying to refine our process or become better, and just everyone keeping up with those changes. So I think, again, be mindful of that it's definitely people over process. So that's kind of the first rule of Agile, and we're not even a full Agile shop. I like that term. It's people over process. And so if you really focus on how your people work best and then mirror Asana towards that, it does pretty well. The biggest concern or feedback we get is that we do have probably the most of any role that I have is developers, and the integration into how do I say this? The integration into showing your progress against certain version control commits or GitHub commits, which is getting super nerdy. That's still a little hard because you have to reference Asana IDs. And so the Asana IDs, if you don't know how to look at the URL, aren't super clear. We're looking at better ways to manage that. Again, that's where it comes back to, if the individual persons want to manage their kind of daily tasks and GitHub issues, I don't care as long as they're accountable to the overarching outcomes of that week. So there is some feedback, probably mostly from the development team, of, well, I can't reference my Asana story as well as I'd like to in my development process. But from a design team, from a project management and strategy team, and then really the developers have adopted it pretty well. I think we've all just kind of stuck with it and said, this is going to be our tool. It allows us to do what we need to do.
Awesome. Great. And one more question, George, and this is coming from Steven. He asks, how many client projects do you typically work on concurrently? And so I'd love if you could discuss that at a team level, like across the company, and then also how many does each person kind of work with at one time?
Yeah, great question, especially if you're in an agency environment. I mean, ideally, we want to act in kind of our mantra or our tagline, if you will, as a startup team for hire. So, an ideal startup team would be one that is really focused, completely bought in, just completely soaking themselves in one idea and heading forward towards that idea and its outcome. That's incredibly expensive. And so it's really hard to think about putting 5 or 6 or more people on one project full time all the time and making that affordable for a startup, or making that affordable even for a brand. And so I think what we find is that we try to put any one person or team member will only be on 2 at the most 3 projects. And there's usually one primary project, which is their core project, and they're either acting as a supplement or a supportive role for another project, or they're coming off of another project that they've been kind of on a primary space. As a company, I mentioned we're about 20 people. We have about 3 full-time teams, which include, again, a strategist, a UI designer, usually at least 2 developers, and a project manager. Each of those team members, the developers usually end up being a little bit more focused because the final result rests on them. Designers will come in and out as we're testing out new concepts or new ideas. And then the project managers do float a little bit between different projects because they're able to kind of touch in on getting statuses and not have to be spending 100% of each day on one project. So it's kind of a bird's eye view. And a number of projects as a company. We'll have, again, about 3 large projects because each team kind of has one dedicated project. And then either as a support role for previous clients or smaller projects will come in or go through a strategy session or something like that. So 3 concurrent large projects and then usually 4 or 5 smaller projects going on at any given time. But as much as possible, we'd love to be working or keep those teams focused if we can.
Incredible. Well, that'll wrap up our questions. I want to thank everybody that joined us today. I want to thank George. Thank you so much for joining us today. It's been such a pleasure working with you, and thank you for sharing all these best practices. I'm sure everybody was able to get some sort of insight about client management. Thank you, George, and we hope to see you all again soon.
My pleasure. Thanks, guys, for the time. Hope you guys learned a little bit from this.
Wonderful. Thank you, everyone.